Hey everyone, Pastor George here with today's episode of A New Thing. We're going to be talking about cults today. I know people love talking about cults. I like talking about cults, but especially the importance of knowing your Bible, right? It just there are lots of sad things happen in this world because people abuse God's word, and people who do not know any better or should know better are taken in by it. And so in order to educate, in order to get better at doing this, in order to completely reiterate the promises and teachings of God, we have to talk about this. So I'm going to talk about cults today, false prophets, some interesting doctrines that you may hear, and just be aware of why they are wrong. So we're going to start off with a Bible passage today. Matthew 7:15 through 20. I think I've used this in other contexts, but I guess we're really honing in on it today. Jesus is talking to his disciples. This is a Sermon on the Mount. This is what he says. He says, "Watch out for false prophets. They come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ferocious wolves. By their fruit you will recognize them. Do people pick grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? Likewise, every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus, by their fruit, you will recognize them." This is going to be our topic text for today. By the way, if you end up hearing a cricket, somehow one got into my office and it will not shut up. So I apologize for that if you hear that. All right. So the reason I'm talking about this is this story that I found. Actually, it was on Christianity Today, and they were reporting on a law in Kenya about registering churches. I had never heard about this before, it's crazy. So maybe you have, but I feel like unless you pay attention to some sort of international news source, you probably won't see this, just because this is a blind spot for the United States, as lots of stuff that happens in the United States is blind spot for others. But Kenya, this is what it says: Kenya, exhumations continue as Shakahoa in Shakahoa Forest. And so it goes on to talk about this doomsday cult that went into this forest, and there's this massive burial of a bunch of members where the mass graves that they found, and this is in March or June. I think it could be June. I always forget that other places do day year first, while we do day month, while we do month day. So it could either be March or June, but it says it stands at 436, right? The number of people they found buried there in these shallow graves. And only 34 of them have been identified. And you just see that this has been going on for a while. They arrested the pastor and a few other people. And that's it, right? There's not a ton. What they did find is that there are people who were not starved to death, that were clearly killed as well. And we're going to use Wikipedia. Obviously, Wikipedia is a source that's not always very reliable, but I really found it to be a good place to kind of helpfully condense all of the material. So we're going to be looking at several different places for that, just to talk about it. So this is the name of this organization that did this, right? It's called Good News International Ministries. And you'll notice it says, this is their official logo. It says Servant P.N. Mackenzie with End Times Message. And this is Paul Natenga. I believe you would say this Natenga, though I could be wrong. Natenga Mackenzie. This is their website, which I went to. Ours is better, I think. All sorts of, it's just a blog spot. That's all it is. And it's outdated. There's nothing really here, but this is what it looks like, right? They have like a little television thing that they run, and where he gives sermons and stuff like that. He's in prison now. But anyway, they went to, he had like a farm out in this region, and so they all went out there, and he told them to starve themselves so that they could meet Jesus, which is interesting, right? I mean, the interesting part about Christianity is it's always had this, we were just talking about this in Young Adults actually last night, it's always had this ascetic element to it, right? That there's this idea of denying of the self, and people who deny themselves can be more holy. Now, that's not really what it says, right? But that ends up being taught by a lot of people, right? Like monks and nuns and things like that, right? But it's this group, right, which went out into the forest, and 400 people are confirmed to die. Actually, if we look at the actual other page about this, right? So this is a map of Kenya. You can see down here that little red dot is where it is. So it's close to a city called Mombasa. And the deaths, right, that they have as of 2 months ago are 448, 72 injured. So they found people who were kind of starving and rescued them, and there's 613 people missing. Now, of course, all of this is, these are numbers that are not solid, so take all this with a grain of salt. But let's say that this is the exact numbers here, right? This is more people who would die in this, because, I mean, if these people are missing, by this point, they're probably dead, right? They're just buried and they haven't been found. This is more people than died at Jonestown. Right? We've talked about Jonestown on here before. So he forced them to go without food in order to meet Jesus, right? So what does this place teach? Well, one, they're really concerned with the end times. I think you can see that there, end time message, right? Which is really important, right? It's really, really important to talk about that. I mean, this is actually what my sermon a few weeks ago was on when I talked about the Olivet Discourse. I've talked about the Olivet Discourse on here before, usually in relation to saying it's not about modern day Israel, but just think about like what Jesus says generally is we need to be very careful with how we interpret these things because they have consequences, right? It's in places like the Olivet Discourse, if we are not careful with how we are interpreting it, cults are born. I have not gone through all of this guy's teaching. I've not gone through all the teaching of William Branham, but I would not be surprised if they lean heavily on, the Olivet Discourse and Revelation in order to convince people of these things, right? Just like people before them, right? David Koresh and stuff like that. So we really need to know our Bibles well, especially our Old Testaments. All right, we need to know the Old Testament really, really well. And the reason we have to know it well is because people are going to take language used in the New Testament, which is referencing the Old, and they're going to say, oh, this is about today, because no one pays attention to the original context that these things were usually written in. So, pay attention to your Old Testament. That's what I'm going to say to you. So anyway, this guy, he's had a bunch of issues over the years. He was a taxi driver, which is interesting. Right? He worked as a taxi driver in Nairobi from 1997 to 2003. And he kind of built this following over time. It's a Pentecostal church, specifically a Oneness Pentecostal church. Oneness Pentecostals are Unitarians, so they reject the teachings of the Trinity, and they baptize only in the name of Jesus. It's a kind of a big growing movement amid Pentecostalism these days. Of course, most Pentecostals are Trinitarians, which is good, right? That's the biblical stance. But there's this movement since the 50s and 60s of rejecting the Trinity in Pentecostals and Pentecostal circles, which of course puts them outside of the mainstream church, right? That is a tier 1 doctrine. That is a deciding on whether or not you're a Christian or not, right? That is Nicene tier importance. So once you've left that, as far as I'm concerned, right, like I would say Wikipedia describes these people as a Christian new religious movement. I would say that, yes, I guess if we're speaking about the broad term of what is a Christian, yeah, I guess they would claim to be, right? But it's like they've now exited themselves from the mainstream. And so I would, I would say they're heretics. Cult is obviously very apt, but also very loaded language. So I think just saying they're heretical does a good enough job at separating them as apart from mainstream Christianity. But anyway, he brings these people out in the forest, says they have to starve themselves to meet Jesus, and many of them do. Those that do not were killed by people. The government said that he hired criminals, right? You'll see that here. It declared Mackenzie hired criminals armed with crude weapons to kill followers who changed their minds. I don't know about that. Right? This is still an ongoing investigation. This is possible, right? It would also surprise me if some of the more zealous members, people in the inner circle, were also killing people. That's happened before with groups like this, like Jonestown and stuff like that. So the majority of deaths were children. This is to be expected in a way, because if you're starving, right, children have less body fat, less parts of their body to be eaten away, because that's how starvation kills you, right? Your body starts eating itself, essentially, and so they're going to die. Most, they found families buried together. They found people who were strangled, beaten, things like that, right? Very, very bad. He's been locked up, waiting in prison, and this is the and I don't know what's going to happen. I'm sure something's going to happen to him. I don't know what at all what the Kenyan legal system is like or what could happen, but I'm guessing he's not going to get out. And so anyway, this guy, right, there's a name that kept coming up again and again and again, right? So you'll see this here. This is what the detectives from the unit said. They said Mackenzie, that's this guy's last name, right, brainwashed his converts using William Branham's end of days theology and convinced them that starvation could hasten their escape from this life to be with Jesus. Which, if you mean killing yourself, then yeah, I guess that's true, although this is where the sadness of this is, which is, what Jesus are you talking about, right? This isn't the Jesus of Scripture. We were just looking at Luke 7 last night, where Jesus is accused of being a glutton and a drunkard because he's not living like the way John was, John the Baptist, but living a very ascetic lifestyle. I don't want to say starving himself, but not living like what we would consider well, right? Camel hair, locusts, wild honey, not a great way. But here, right, Jesus is living the opposite, and people are going after him for that. So who is this guy? He was a faith healer, claimed to be a prophet with the anointing of Elijah, had come to prelude Jesus' second coming. People said he was leading a doomsday cult. He was one of these guys who was a restorationist, so he believed that the church lost their way long, long time ago, and he's bringing it back. You always need to be careful for people like that. I always would be very cautious if you run into that sort of teaching. And he was a oneness Pentecostal. He taught the serpent seed doctrine, which is a doctrine that the serpent had sex with Eve in the garden, and they had children, and it's those children, especially Cain. They believe that Cain was their child, which is not true, right? Genesis says that's Adam and Eve's child, but the way they read that is that it's actually the serpent's, and that the entirety of human history is going to be all about fighting between Cain's seed and the seed of Eve until the seed of Eve is victorious over these other people. If you read the thing, you'll notice that a lot of people relate this with racial identity, basically saying their race is the one that is the good one and other people's are the bad. You'll see all sorts of stuff like that, this is clearly heresy, clearly wrong, should be condemned, and it is. By really everyone who's normal, right? He said that Christian denominations were part of the mark of the beast. Sure, right? This is just weird material that you run into. But you notice here, right, that one bad teacher has waves of disciples and followers where this is bad and can lead to terrible things that happen, right? I'm not going to say that if you disagree with Christian doctrine that you're automatically set for something like this Shakahoa incident to happen, but it certainly begins to, like, your theology has an effect on how you act in life, right? And so if you have bad theology, bad things are going to happen in response to that. And so as Christians, we have to be very, very, very aware of how people are using the Bible. And we have to be very attentive to the fruits, right? Now, of course, unfortunately, when the fruits are this obvious, it's too late. And for many in Kenya, obviously, this guy, everyone knew he was a weirdo or whatever, right? That he shouldn't be trusted and things like that. The government tried to get him a few times, but this is why the importance of talking about these things has a ripple effect as well. Because if we talk about these things, we make people aware. The more we talk about the Bible, the more people are aware, right? What if it was just common knowledge, right? What if everyone, random person on the street that you met, what if the common knowledge was that in the Olivet Discourse, Jesus was talking about the destruction of the Second Temple? It wasn't about the rapture. It wasn't about the end of the world. How many things like this would be avoided if that was the case? So many. And that's why theology and proper understanding of the Bible are so important, right? We would nip this stuff in the bud. People would just, of course, these things would still happen, right? There's always going to be people that take advantage and people that are led astray and looking for something new and whatever. But I believe that if we did this, this is like good theology saves lives when it comes to cults and things like that. Because if it was just common knowledge that a lot of these doctrines that are abused by others weren't that way, right? They weren't that easily misunderstood. We would much more easily be able to avoid stuff like this. So good theology saves lives. That's going to be the title for today's video. And we have to avoid falling into patterns of interpretation that become traditions and then can't be challenged, especially when it comes to end time stuff, because that is ways, I heard this line one time, right? You do a conference on the Trinity. It's a very important thing. Like, you get 5 people to come, right? But if you do a conference on the end times, you talk about blood moons, all that other stuff, the place will be packed. You won't have enough tickets to sell, right? They'll sell out so quickly. So we have to be careful with the way that we use theology, the way that we interpret the Bible, and be very conscious about where these things come from, where these ideas come from, rather than just accepting them at face value. All right, anyway, that's what I'm talking about today. Prayers, of course, for everyone involved in this situation. God's justice be done. I think Jesus promises that in the passage that we looked at. So I know that justice is going to be done here, but it's sad nonetheless. And so we should pray for those families and the whole situation, and just be very careful with how we interpret the Bible. So I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your Thursday. I will see you guys on Sunday for worship. Peace out.